Hello, this video will explain what a project proposal is and demonstrate how to write a project proposal for your Communication Research Methods course. The research proposal is an important preliminary work which forms the basis of a future research project. A project proposal does three things. First, it identifies a clear research question. Second, it connects a research question to a specific body of academic literature. Imagine your reading as a conversation between scholars. Your proposal is your way of joining that conversation. Third, you have to describe a method for answering your question. So, a proposal designs a research project from conceptualization to project planning. For this assignment, you may develop a proposal for research on a communication and media studies topic of your choice for a future project that you might consider for an MA minor thesis. Applying appropriate research methods to addressing your research question will develop your ability to innovatively solve media research problems. You will also demonstrate that you can apply research skills to a range of challenges in communication and media studies and ensure that the proposed research is achievable. The project proposal can be broken down into three main sections. In section 1, you'll consider what is the significance of this topic. That is, what do we learn about the social importance of media by looking at this particular part of the media communication process. Section 2 is the most important section of the proposal. In this section, consider what are the key ideas on this topic, who are the key writers, what are their most useful ideas, and what methods do they use. Drawing on section 1 and 2, explain the method that you will use in making sense of your database. What evidence are you looking for? Why are you looking for it? How will you look for it? In this section, you'll identify a research question and explain its importance. What you have to do here is tell your reader what we learn about the social importance of media by looking at this particular part of the media communication process. In this section, you must provide evidence of your topic's relevance to existing media research scholarship. Your evidence might come from news stories, government or NGO reports, academic research. But you should not rely on assumptions or common sense, and don't make any claim without supporting evidence.
Regulating alcohol advertising. What do people find offensive about alcohol advertising? How do media link pleasure, culture, and consumption?
Remember that as a media scholar, your job is to explain that media have far deeper and more complex effects on society than most people think. The impact of advertising is about much more than whether commercial messages lie or exaggerate the benefits of using certain products. So in this section, in regard to this problem, you would explain that any question about advertising must recognise that commercial messages do not simply transmit information, but powerful ideas about how life should be lived, and their effects go way beyond the matter of whether consumers do or don't buy the product. So, one way to approach the question is to say there are reasons to believe that looking at the things that the public find offensive about alcohol advertising is a good way to examine how the idea that consumption and pleasure and fulfillment go hand in hand has become a common sense idea that people use.
That said, there are reasons why alcohol advertising has a particular relevance. First, drinking has become a global health problem. The World Health Organization's call for an alcohol advertising ban, 2009, was because of drinking's impact on mortality. This has led to new health recommendations around alcohol consumption, including the drastic new conclusion that no level of consumption can be considered safe. Drinking has therefore become a considerable political problem in the management of health systems, and media researchers have underlined the scale of the problem that societies face in getting the public to rethink their habits. For example, Australian researchers find alcohol being promoted to children during television sporting events in 2015. So the question of how people make sense of alcohol advertising is connected to understandings of the pleasures and dangers of drinking, which is in turn a factor in the enormously costly management of public health, which is one of the reasons why this question matters.
Whatever your topic, it helps enormously if you can develop some kind of overall "this is why the question matters to society" statement.
The other factor to add in here is that alcohol advertising is significant as one of the areas where we can see how social media have changed conventional communication routes. The idea that advertising works by developing desires and tastes, rather than simply selling products, has exploded in significance. Kara and Rod Merkel think that social media have a great deal to do with this, as these new platforms make it easier to integrate products with lifestyles, people, places, and events.
In this section, you'll identify specific theories that you will use to guide your research. What are those theories? What do they mean? And how do the theories relate to the question? First, identify and define academic concepts. Next, show understanding by explaining these concepts in your own words. Then, explain how these concepts address your research question. It might be possible to develop, refine, and extend the work you've previously done in your earlier annotated bibliography and literature review. So in your first section, you've mapped out the general significance of this topic. This section is a bit different in that you're going to be exploring more precise concepts related to specific studies that will help you to explain the method you have used. What you want to do in this section is elaborate a bit more on some of the ideas from section 1, then move towards concepts that rationalise the steps you will take in the method portion. In this study,
one approach would be to start with a good, authoritative text on the history and influences of advertising as a form of social communication. A great option here is Leese, Klein and Jolly's Social Communication in Advertising from 2002. The book is useful because the authors explain how advertising moved from informational to transformational modes, meaning that advertising is mostly about fitting consumption into stories of well-being and happiness. This process is much more subtle than promising that buying product X will lead to outcome Y. So it's always going to be hard to regulate advertising because very little advertising actually makes fact-based promises. In fact, most advertising doesn't sell products, but ideas about happiness. So that becomes the basic idea we can use to make sense of any product.
Next, we can
explain in more detail how alcohol advertising, in particular, is an excellent case study for explaining what Leese et al.'s ideas mean in practice. Gunter, Hansen and Torrey's Alcohol Advertising and Young People's Drinking, 2010, is a good choice here. They explain that alcohol is promoted through a variety of communication strategies that are about much more than advertising. Advertising is centrally part of alcohol sales, but it sits alongside other strategies, often really simple things like in-store promotions, coupons, and the like. So the challenge is that any conversation about regulating alcohol advertising is that such moves do not address the full array of techniques that the industry uses to speak to consumers.
Finally, we can flesh out the political relevance of this question.
Sonia Livingston and Peter Lunt have written of a general shift in media regulation towards consumer-driven, complaint-led systems. Such systems, they argue, tip the balance in favour of media industries because, among other reasons, consumers frequently lack the time, knowledge and language to articulate their concerns about advertising in an effective form.
So at the end of this section, the reader would know exactly why the regulation of alcohol advertising is an excellent case study for the challenges of advertising in society in general. In this section, you'll propose a method for gathering and analysing the evidence. Tell the story of your data. What does it represent? Why have you chosen it? What will you look for? How will you look for it? And why will you be looking for it? Examples of evidence we've looked at in this course are interviews with people working in media industries, various forms of media content, policy documents relating to media industries, interviews with media users. It's a good idea to select a method from one of the key readings or from your own readings. Explain what this method is and explain why it suits your question.
Overall, we have the idea that alcohol advertising is difficult to regulate because advertising is a sophisticated form of communication that avoids over-persuasion most of the time. That advertising language has worked its way into the everyday common sense, and because of this, people find it difficult to complain about advertising, even if they see the point in the first place. One way to examine how these ideas work in practice is to look at the archives of consumer complaints. For instance, the UK's ASA keeps records of all complaints that have been made in the UK about drinking ads and the adjudications that are made on them.
Can you find a similar example from your home country? You need to justify your data set. Here you tell the story about why your evidence represents an illuminating case study, a study of here that will shed light on what might be going on elsewhere.
The ASA is useful on this because it holds searchable archive of all advertising complaints from 2011. You can search for drinks advertisements and find a full records of complaints and adjudications made in this period. The dates are notable because we know this has been a crucial period in the history of media regulation and alcohol marketing. So there's a good chance we'll be able to connect this data to bigger conceptual pictures mapped out in sections 1 and 2.
But what are you going to do with the data? What you must do here is explain how you will identify patterns or notable elements in your dataset in an organised and reasoned way.
Let's look at what Ruddock did in the key reading for this week. Ruddock looked at the conceptual work on alcohol advertising and identified a number of key indicators to look for in complaints. The upshot of all our reading is there are reasons to think that people don't complain as much about alcohol advertising as they could or should, partly because we have become so used to associating drinking and pleasure that very little of what we see actually catches our attention, and if it doesn't, we aren't really sure why. We can address these questions through looking for the following points. Who complains? What do they complain about? How do advertising companies respond? What adjudications are made and why? Who tends to win, industry or consumer?
What you want to do is pick up indicators to look out for in your data that will allow you to tell a story relating your data to the theory mentioned in the first sections, whether you're supporting those ideas, modifying them, or rejecting them altogether. Remember, a method section is not just a set of procedures, it's an argument about how particular techniques help demonstrate the relevance of a data set to a field of inquiry.
As an example of how this works, by using these methods on this dataset, Ruddock was able to reach the following conclusion. Looking for common themes and exemplary cases, the modal complaint came from an individual about a television advertisement, and the commonest objection was that the ad would reach or appeal to minors. Alcohol companies usually contested the complaint, but usually lost. Ruddock 2017, page 237. Very few people complain about alcohol advertising, and they do so for a very narrow range of reasons, consistent with the view that alcohol marketing operates on the terrain of common sense.
Now you have everything you need to begin your project proposal assignment. Good luck writing your project proposal.